was a quiet night on Earth. The sky was calm, the stars were shining, and everything felt normal. People were sleeping, working, or watching TV. No one knew that tonight would change everything. At exactly 02:03 a.m., every satellite in orbit received the same strange signal. It wasn't noise, it wasn't a human transmission. It was something no one had ever heard before. A message from deep space. At first, scientists thought it was a mistake, maybe a glitch, maybe a reflection. But the message repeated again and again. It wasn't random. It had structure. It had language. And within minutes, computers across the world began to translate it. The message was short, just 3 words. You are chosen. The world stopped. Phones rang in secret rooms. Government officials held emergency meetings. News channels went crazy. Everyone had the same question. Who sent the message? And what does chosen mean? There was no answer. Only silence followed the signal. But just before sunrise, something happened that made everyone believe the message was real. The sky changed. In every country, people looked up and saw it. Lines of light moving across the stars. They weren't satellites, they weren't planes. They were ships. Giant ships, quiet and dark, just floating above the earth. But they didn't attack. They didn't move. They just watched. The world held its breath. Then, in every major city, at the same time, words appeared in the sky. Glowing letters written in every human language. The same word. Prepare. Panic started. Some people ran. Some people prayed. Some people tried to fight. But no weapon touched the ships. Missiles disappeared before reaching them. Jets lost power. It was clear Earth was completely helpless. But still, nothing attacked. The ships didn't fire. They didn't even respond. They only watched. Inside the United Nations, world leaders gathered. For the first time in history, every country agreed to listen, to cooperate, to understand what was happening. Scientists studied the message again. Hidden inside the signal were more words. Old words from ancient languages, some long forgotten. But one phrase stood out. It said, "The weapon awakens." That changed everything. People began to ask the real question. Were humans the weapon? For thousands of years, humanity had fought wars, suffered pain, and still survived. No matter how dark things became, humans always found a way to rise. Other species in the galaxy may have watched. Maybe they had been waiting for the moment when humanity would be ready. A secret group of alien beings called the Circle watched from deep space. They were old, very old, and they had seen many worlds fall. But they had also seen Earth. They saw how humans changed with every fight, how they became stronger through pain, how they could turn fear into courage, hope into fire, rage into power. The Circle didn't choose Earth to save it. They chose Earth to save everything else. Far away, beyond the stars, something terrible was coming. A force that devoured minds, silenced thoughts, and turned life into dust. It was called the Silence, and no species had ever stopped it. But now the Circle had made their choice. They would not send weapons, they would not send armies. They would send humanity. The aliens never explained why. They never said what they saw in humans. Maybe it was their stubbornness. Maybe it was their chaos. Maybe it was their pain. But one thing was clear, humans were different. And now they were the universe's final hope. On the 3rd day, the ships finally moved. But instead of attacking, they opened. Strange light filled the sky. And once again the message returned. This time, it was burned into the clouds, into the sea, into every screen on Earth. One word. Weapon. People cried. People screamed. But some understood. This was not the end. It was the beginning. A soldier in a small desert camp looked up and smiled. He had seen too much war, too much death, but for the first time he felt something else. Purpose. A young girl in a ruined city saw the sky and whispered, "Maybe they need us." An old woman in a quiet village closed her eyes and said, "It's time." Across the earth, something began to wake up. Not in machines, not in weapons, but in people, in their hearts, in their souls. The silence of space had spoken, and now it was humanity's turn to answer. The day the universe chose. Humanity was the day everything changed. Far away from Earth, in a part of the galaxy hidden from most maps, a group of powerful alien leaders met in silence. They were not soldiers. They were not rulers of planets. They were something older, something deeper. They were called the Circle, and they had watched the universe for millions of years. In a cold room made of silver light and living stone, 12 different alien species sat around a long table. Their eyes were different, their bodies were strange, but they all looked worried. A red cloud moved slowly on the screen in front of them. It was not just a storm, it was death itself, the silence. A dark force moving through space, turning minds into dust, eating memory, ending life without sound. The Circle had tried everything, giant machines, powerful armies, even planet killers. Nothing worked. The silence had no fear, no weakness, no soul. It could not be touched, could not be reasoned with. Every species that fought it was lost. Every world fell. And now, the silence was moving again, straight toward the core of the galaxy. One of the Circle members, a tall being with 6 eyes and no mouth, finally broke the silence. Its voice came through light, not sound. It said, "It is time." Another, shaped like a floating orb of gas, replied. The humans, the others, looked at each other. Some were unsure, some were afraid. But one, the oldest of them all, simply nodded. "They are not ready," someone whispered. "They are dangerous," another said. But the oldest being, with skin made of stars, said, "That is why we must choose them." They showed Earth on the screen. Chaos, war, beauty, love, pain, hope. Humans were wild, humans were unstable, but they were also unstoppable. No matter what happened, humans kept fighting, kept rising. They were full of emotions, full of fire, full of something no other species had. The will to change everything. The Circle had studied Earth for a long time. They watched the humans survive disasters, fight enemies stronger than them, and still move forward. Their greatest power was not strength. It was refusal. Refusal to give up. Refusal to kneel. Refusal to break. And now the Circle believed humans were the only answer left. One being asked, "What if they turn against us?" Another said, "What if they become worse than the silence?" The oldest replied, "Then it means we were already doomed." On Earth, people still didn't understand what had happened. News showed images of the alien ships. The word weapon was still written in the sky. But no one had explained anything. No aliens came to speak. No leaders gave clear answers. Only one signal kept repeating from deep space. Prepare. But prepare for what? In a hidden base under the ocean, human scientists studied the signal again. This time they found something new. A secret layer inside the message. A list of human names, locations, ages. These were not soldiers or world leaders. They were normal people. A nurse in India, a blind boy in Nigeria, a broken soldier in Russia, a teacher in Brazil, a teenager in Pakistan. All of them had one thing in common. They had survived something impossible. The message was not choosing Earth's strongest. It was choosing its most unbreakable. Meanwhile, in space, the Circle watched the silence spread faster. A nearby planet, once full of life, went dark. No signal, no sound, just cold. The Council had little time left, so they sent a second message to Earth. This time it came not in code, but in dreams. People around the world began to see strange visions in their sleep. A battlefield made of stars, a voice whispering, "You must remember who you are." Some woke up crying, some woke up ready, but all of them felt the same thing, a call. The governments tried to control it. They wanted answers, but no technology could stop the dreams. And those who received them began to change. They started to remember things they never learned, battle tactics, alien languages, visions of futures not yet written. It was like something inside them had been unlocked. The circle had done this before. Long ago, they had planted something inside human DNA, a forgotten code, a key, and now they had turned the key. The silence would come soon. The stars were growing colder, but for the first time in 1,000 years, the circle had hope, because humanity was waking up, and the universe was about to witness what happens when the most broken, most passionate, and most dangerous species is given a single mission. Fight for everything, or lose it all. And deep in the blackness of space even, the silence paused, because it too had started to feel something strange, something new, something human. High above the Earth, in a silent ship floating in space, an alien warrior named Kale watched a screen. On the screen, he saw humans training, fighting, running, falling, and getting up again. He had fought in many wars. He had crushed enemies, 3 times his size, but what he saw now was strange. Humans were not fast, they were not strong. Their weapons were simple. Their bodies were soft, yet somehow they were terrifying. At first, Kale laughed. These creatures were loud, emotional, and full of fear. How could they be the universe's last hope? But then he saw something that made his laughter stop. A human soldier, wounded and bleeding, refused to quit. The enemy was stronger. The human was alone, but he kept fighting. He used dirt, rocks, and even his own broken weapon. He didn't care about the pain. He didn't care about death. He cared only about one thing, not losing. Kale turned to his commander. "Why do they keep going?" he asked. The commander replied, "Because humans don't understand when to stop." Across the galaxy, more aliens watched humans closely. What they saw didn't make sense. Humans argued with each other during missions. They disobeyed orders. They made strange jokes during battle. And still, they won. In one battle simulation, the silence sent in a wave of machines. Cold, perfect, and fast. The machines destroyed alien defenses in minutes. But then a group of human soldiers arrived. They didn't follow the plan. They made up their own moves. One jumped into the fire to save a friend, another charged alone to distract the machines. They should have lost, but they didn't. Somehow, they turned chaos into victory. The aliens were confused. "How do they do it?" one asked. The answer came from an old AI that had studied human history. It said, "Humans are the only species that see madness as opportunity. They do not wait for a miracle. They become the miracle." The silence started watching humans too, but not from the outside, from inside their minds. They tried to control them, as they had done with other species. They sent dreams filled with fear. They showed humans their deepest pain. They tried to break them from within, and at first it worked. Some humans fell, some gave up. But then something unexpected happened. The humans got back up. They didn't just resist the darkness, they learned from it. They turned fear into strength. One human, a young woman named Eva, was trapped in a dream prison by the silence. He was shown the death of her family again and again. But instead of breaking, she whispered, "Then I will fight for them forever." The silence couldn't understand it. Why didn't she give up? It tried harder. It sent her more pain, more fear. But each time she came back stronger. In the end, Eva escaped the dream prison and took control of it. She used the silence as own weapon against it. That's when the universe began to understand. Humans were not powerful because of their strength. They were powerful because of their refusal. Refusal to be controlled. Refusal to stay broken. Refusal to stop fighting. The Circle had known this. That's why they chose humans, not as soldiers, not as leaders, but as something else, something new. The silence grew afraid. It had never feared before. It had never needed to, but now it whispered across its dark network. They are not a weapon. They are infection. Because humanity was not just fighting. It was changing things. The alien allies began to feel different when standing near humans. They felt braver. They felt hope. One alien commander, after fighting beside a human squad, said, "I used to fear death. Now I fear not trying." Humans were not teaching others how to win. They were teaching them how to never quit. That was something the silence could not stop. A final report came to the Circle's table. It showed human behavior during training. It showed how they turned pain into purpose, how they created strategies. During battle, no computer could predict. And at the bottom of the report was a warning. Do not try to control them. Do not try to lead them, stand beside them, or be left behind. And so, the Council made their next move. They would give humans full command of the coming mission. It was a risk, but it was the only chance. The war had not yet begun, but the galaxy was already changing, and deep in the heart of the silence, something impossible happened. It felt fear. Fear of humans. The sky over Earth had changed. Where there were once stars, now giant ships floated like shadows. People looked up every night wondering when the war would begin. But before the first shot could be fired, something else had to happen. Training. The Circle did not just choose warriors. They chose survivors, people who had faced the worst and still stood tall. These were not perfect heroes. They were broken, tired, angry. But inside them was a fire no other species had. That fire needed to be sharpened, controlled, turned into a weapon the universe had never seen. The chosen humans were taken in small groups. No one knew how. One second they were in their homes, or at work, or walking in the street. The next second, they stood on cold floors inside alien training centers, hidden across space. Some panicked, some screamed. But all of them heard the same calm voice. You are not here to learn how to fight. You already know how. You are here to remember who you really are. The training did not start with guns or combat. It began with silence, with facing fear. Each person was placed alone in a room. No light, no sound, only memories. Some saw their worst days. A mother losing her child. A soldier leaving a friend behind. A girl watching her home burn. The training forced them to break so they could rebuild. One man named Harris, a firefighter who lost his entire team in a building collapse, sat in the dark for hours. He kept seeing their faces. At first he begged to forget, but then he stood up and shouted, "If I carry their pain, then I carry their strength too." The doors opened. He had passed the first test. Next came the mind training. Aliens called Mentarchs entered their dreams, testing their thoughts. They showed them false futures, lies, temptations, fear. But the humans surprised them again. One teenager, Maria, saw herself living a rich, easy life if she walked away from the fight. She smiled and said, "That's not my path." The Mentarchs reported back, "They see truth in pain. They choose fire over comfort." After the mind came the body. But the training was not normal. The humans were not made stronger by machines or drugs. Instead, they were forced to rely on each other. Teams were dropped into alien environments, frozen worlds, burning deserts, empty moons with low oxygen. They had to survive together. In one test, two humans, a blind man and a woman with a damaged leg, were left alone on a mountain. The instructors expected them to fail, but they didn't. The woman carried the man during the day. At night, he listened to the wind and guided them by sound. When they reached the checkpoint, the alien trainers asked, "Why didn't you leave?" "The weak behind?" The woman replied, "He's not weak, he's my eyes." The Circle watched all of this in silence. They had trained millions before. Soldiers, assassins, warlords. But never had they seen anything like this. Humans didn't just survive the training. They changed it. They created their own rules. They helped each other. They joked. They cried. They yelled. But they kept going. Then came the final test. The chosen humans were put into a simulation of the silence. They had to face it alone. The simulation created fear beyond imagination. The loss of family, the destruction of Earth, the feeling of being truly alone in the dark. Many failed. They screamed. They begged. Some never woke up, but others endured. One woman, Leon, saw her entire city fall. She stood in the ashes, the wind cold on her face. The voice of the silence whispered, "You are nothing. You will lose. Give up." She whispered back, "No." The simulation tried harder. It showed her the future, empty, dead, forgotten. But she smiled through tears and said, "Even if I fall, I will leave fire behind me." The system couldn't break her. She passed. One by one, the strongest humans completed the final test. They were changed now, not just trained, awakened. They could feel each other's thoughts, sense danger before it came. And more importantly, they had become something new. Not a weapon, a warning. The aliens gave them armor made from light, ships that moved with thought. But they didn't give them orders, because they knew now, you don't command humans. You walk beside them. The war had not started yet, but in every dark corner of the galaxy, the silence felt it. Something ancient was rising, and this time, it wasn't running. It was coming for them. The galaxy held its breath. The silence had reached the edge of the Orion Arm. Stars began to dim. Space itself felt colder. Planets near the edge simply went dark. No warnings, no escape. Ships sent to investigate never returned. The war had begun. But this time, the enemy was not ready, because humanity was coming. In a dark chamber on one of the Circle's command ships, the new human strike teams stood side by side. Men and women, young and old, all dressed in armor made from alien alloys, armor that moved like skin, glowing softly with energy. Behind their eyes there was no fear, only fire. The mission was simple: hit first, hit hard. Show the silence that humanity was not like the others. Their target was a dead system, a group of planets already consumed by the silence. No survivors, no light. The perfect place to send a message. As the human strike ships approached, they knew what had become of those worlds. Giant black roots wrapped around the planets like claws. Space cracked like broken glass, and floating through it all were strange creatures, half machine, half shadow. The silence had grown stronger, but so had humanity. The first shots were not fired by the humans. They were fired by the enemy. Streams of dark energy rushed toward the ships, but the humans didn't dodge. They flew straight into the storm. Inside the lead ship, a man named Reyes smiled. "They still don't understand us," he said. His team dropped from orbit like fireballs. No hesitation, no fear. Their boots hit the ground of the ruined planet, cracked and shaking under the weight of the enemy. The shadows rushed at them, and then everything exploded, but not from bombs, from chaos. The humans fought like no other species had. They moved fast, but not perfect. They made mistakes. They shouted to each other. They ran out of ammo and used their fists. But every time they fell, they got back up. One soldier, barely able to stand, used a broken alien spear to take down a beast 3 times his size. Another, cornered by 4 enemies, activated her armor's core and burned everything around her, including herself. She smiled as she fell, knowing she had saved her team. The silence had fought machines before. It had fought logic. It had fought order. But it had never fought madness. It had never fought human will. And for the first time, it didn't know what to do. The silence tried to adapt. It sent waves of psychic fear, hoping to freeze the humans in place. It showed them their deaths, their pain, their darkest thoughts. But the humans just shouted back louder. One soldier yelled, "We've seen." "Worse, try again." Even when surrounded, the humans laughed. They screamed war songs. Some cried while firing, but none of them ran. Because they knew this was not just a battle, it was a message. Back on the command ship, alien generals watched in disbelief. One said, "They are outnumbered, but they are winning." Another whispered, "No, they're not just winning, they're teaching the silence to feel fear." Hours passed. The enemy began to retreat. The silence, for the first time in its ancient history, pulled back. The humans stood among the ashes of the battlefield. Some were wounded, some had lost friends. but all of them stood tall. Their armor cracked, their eyes burning. They had done it, they had won. The first strike belonged to humanity. Word spread fast across the stars. Planets that once feared the silence now spoke a new name with hope: humans. And somewhere in the dark, the silence moved slower, because now it knew. This war would not be like the others. This enemy would not break. This enemy would not run. This enemy would burn until the last breath. And that was only the beginning. The universe celebrated. Across alien cities and hidden worlds, people watched the human victory again and again. It was not just a win. It was proof. Proof that the silence could bleed. Proof that it could lose. But victories come with a price, and the silence was not done. It had watched. It had learned. It had changed. Now it would strike back. In the dark center of the galaxy where stars no longer burned, something massive moved. A ship, if it could be called that, bigger than any moon, alive with black energy. This was not a machine. It was a living weapon, the core of the silence, a mind that had slept for centuries. Now it woke. It whispered across the stars, not in words, in screams, in fear. Planets began to shake. Light dimmed. And then, without warning, it struck. Not a military base, not a shipyard, but a peaceful colony. One where humans and aliens lived together, rebuilding, laughing, hoping. They never saw it coming. In seconds, the sky turned black. Shadows poured down like a storm. Buildings fell. People vanished. The ground itself cracked open. There were no warnings, no demands, just death. By the time help arrived, it was too late. Nothing remained. Only one word burned across the communication lines. Remember, the silence had sent a message too. Back on the human command ship, the mood had changed. The warriors who had laughed after their last victory now stood silent, angry. A woman named Ava clenched her fists, her voice shaking. They killed civilians, children. They want us to fear them again. Reyes, now a captain, nodded. Then, let's remind them what fear really is. But something else was happening, something deeper. The silence had not just attacked the colony. It had infected the minds of some soldiers. Quietly, slowly. Some began to feel tired. Others heard voices in their dreams. One man, strong and loyal, suddenly turned on his team during a patrol. He screamed, "It's already inside." The humans had won the first strike. But now, the silence was inside their minds. The alien allies started to worry. They had seen entire species fall this way, not by weapons, but from within. The Circle called an emergency meeting. "We cannot stop this infection," said one leader. "It spreads too fast. Even their strongest minds are cracking." But one voice spoke up. It was the old Mentarch, the alien who had tested human thoughts during training. He said, "You're wrong. Humans break, yes, but they rebuild. They do not fear madness. They live with it." So a new plan was made. The humans would go into the heart of the silence, not to destroy it, not yet, but to understand it. They would enter the oldest ruins, the lost systems, the dead zones where no light had touched in centuries. They would face the enemy in its true form. A scout team was chosen. 5 humans, 1 alien guide. Among them was Maria, the young girl who had once turned down a perfect dream to choose war. Now, she would walk into a nightmare. As their ship entered the black zone, strange things began to happen. The stars vanished. The ship's systems began to fail, and the voices returned, soft at first, then louder. Each of them saw things that weren't real. A lost brother, a burning home, a dead lover reaching out. But none of them turned back. Maria whispered to herself, "Pain is real, but so are we." Finally, they reached the ruins. It was a planet once full of life, now nothing but ash. They walked across bones. Giant statues lay broken. The alien guide said, "This place, it was the first to fall." And then, deep underground, they found it. A memory, not a machine, not a weapon, but a living memory. buried by time. It showed them the truth. The silence was not born evil. It was once a race like any other, proud, curious. But it had seen too much. Too many wars. Too many lies. It had cut off its emotions to survive. It killed feeling to keep going. And in doing so, it became the silence. The humans stood in silence, staring at the vision. Reyes finally said, "So they feared pain. That's why they turned cold." Maria nodded. "That's why they hate us. We feel everything, and we still fight." They uploaded the memory, sent it back to the circle, and then they destroyed the ruins. Not in hate, but in mercy. The message was clear now. This war was not just about power, it was about the soul, and humanity's soul was burning brighter than ever. But the silence was still out there, watching, waiting, and preparing its final move. Darkness spread across the stars. The silence had grown silent again, not because it was weak, but because it was waiting, watching. It knew the humans were close to understanding it, and that made them more dangerous than ever before. On Earth, people held their breath. All the victories, all the sacrifices had led to this moment. Humanity had shaken the galaxy. They had shown the impossible was possible. But now, the final battle was coming, and the enemy would show no mercy. From deep space, the core of the silence began to move. It was a ship and a creature, a mind without light, without fear, without love. It had erased thousands of worlds. It had never lost. Now it was heading straight for Earth. The Circle called an emergency council. Alien leaders spoke in panic. "Evacuate Earth," one said. "Hide the humans," said another. But the humans stood firm. Captain Reyes answered, "For them all, we don't run. Not now. Not ever." Across the planet, people prepared, not just soldiers, everyone. Farmers turned their tools into weapons. Engineers built defenses from scrap. Children painted stars on walls, whispering, "We are not afraid." And above, it all in orbit, the human fleet waited. Not large, not advanced, but ready. Because Earth was not just a planet. It was home. The silence came without sound. A black wave across the stars. Its core ship, miles wide, blocked the sun as it approached. Smaller creatures swarmed ahead like insects, ready to tear everything apart. The first shots were fired. Human ships lit the sky with fire. Fighters danced between beams of shadow. Some were hit, some vanished. But still, they pushed forward. On the ground, anti-air guns roared. Civilians took shelter, but many joined the fight. A girl with one arm threw grenades from a rooftop. A grandmother stood beside a wounded soldier, reloading his weapon again and again. The silence was strong, but the humans were louder. In the middle of it all, Maria, now a leader, led a drop team straight into the heart of the enemy. Their target, the mind of the silence. The black ship was alive. Inside, walls moved like muscle. Voices whispered. From nowhere, one by one, her team fell. Some pulled into the dark, others frozen by fear. But Maria kept moving. She reached the core, a glowing orb pulsing with cold light. It spoke to her not with words, but with feelings. Endless pain, cold logic, the death of emotion. It showed her everything the silence had suffered. How it had turned itself into a machine to survive. How it believed feeling was weakness. Maria cried, but not in fear, in sorrow. Then she placed her hand on the orb. "You're wrong," she whispered. "Feeling doesn't make us weak. It makes us human." The orb screamed, the ship shook. The silence, for the first time, felt something it couldn't understand. Empathy. At that moment, across the battlefield, the enemy froze. In space, the ships of the silence began to drift. On the ground, shadow creatures stopped attacking and looked. Around, confused, lost. And in the sky above Earth, the black core ship began to break apart. Reyes, watching from the command deck, whispered, "She did it." Maria had not destroyed the silence. She had changed it. Her mind, filled with memory, emotion, pain, and love, had entered its core. She became a voice inside its darkness, a light inside its storm. The silence didn't die. It slept. And the war ended. Silence returned to space, but this time it was peace. The galaxy was quiet not because of fear, but because of hope. On Earth, people cried and celebrated. Statues were built, not just for the warriors, but for the artists, the children, the teachers, because it was not just weapons that had won this war, it was the human soul. Maria never returned. Her body was gone, but her voice remained. Sometimes, when the stars were clear, children said they could hear her whisper through the wind, "Remember what we are. We feel, we break, we rise." The circle declared Earth as a world of honor, a protector world. No species could attack it again, because now the galaxy knew when the universe needed a weapon, it didn't choose machines. It didn't choose logic. It chose humanity, and the stars would never forget that choice.